What the hell's wrong with you? Would you have the money to pay me for the repairs if you'd scratched my car? You dumb delivery driver. A man spat in Marcus Coleman's direction while cursing. Then he sped off in his blue Porsche. Marcus gnashed his teeth silently and got to his feet while struggling to get his motorcycle upright. He'd landed in a puddle of dirty, smelly water, and his knee had a wound from being scraped against the road. Man, I don't know how much this is going to cost me. He balled his fists as he looked at the spilled food on the road. At this moment, his phone rang. It was a call from Marcus' wife, the belle of Cromford City, Vivian Lorimer. "Hey, honey," he began. "How many times have I told you not to call me that? If you don't show up at the grand ballroom in half an hour, don't bother showing up forever." Vivian hung up after leaving him with just that. Marcus was a little taken aback by this abrupt call. The grand ballroom? Today was the day of the Lorimer family's gathering. The Lorimer family was one of Cromford City's upper-middle-class families, and Marcus was its matrilocal son-in-law. The rest of the family already looked down upon him, if he were to be late. At this thought, Marcus slapped himself on the head and jumped onto his motorcycle, revving the engine and speeding off at top speed. The 2nd of February was the date of the Lorimer family's annual family gathering. On this day, all members of the main and branch families would gather at the family's grand ballroom. Many members of Cromford City's high society would also be in attendance. It was the Lorimer family's grandest event in a year, after all. At this moment, luxurious cars and people dressed in their Sunday best milled around outside the grand ballroom. "Why isn't he here yet?" Vivian glared at her phone and gnashed her teeth. "What? That useless piece you call a husband? Man, who does he think he is? I'd like to see how you're going to explain this to Grandma later." A man dressed in a sharp suit stood before her, his tone dripping with sarcasm. He was the eldest grandchild of the Lorimer family and Vivian's cousin, Luke Lorimer. Luke and Vivian were the two most outstanding people in their generation, and therefore the most likely candidates to become the next head of the Lorimer family. Because of this, Luke had always viewed Vivian as his greatest nemesis. "Shut up. My personal matters are none of your business." Vivian glared at Luke. He merely shrugged, looking contemptuous. Just then, a figure zipped through the crowd and skidded to a stop before Vivian. "Honey, I'm so sorry for being late. There was some traffic." Marcus quickly put his motorcycle aside and took his helmet off, looking sheepish. "Who's this dude? And why is he wearing a DoorDash jacket? Don't tell me someone from the Lorimer family has to rely on making food deliveries to make a living. Wait, you didn't know about this? He's one of the most infamous people in Cromford City, the Lorimer family's matrilocal son-in-law and a leech. You know the story about a frog turning into a prince after being kissed, right? Well, he's that frog." The whispers from the crowd humiliated Vivian. She wanted nothing more than to hide. On the other hand, Luke's smile widened. "What's wrong, honey?" Marcus asked anxiously. He reached out to comfort Vivian, but she slapped his hand away at once. "Marcus, are you doing this on purpose?" Vivian's eyes were red. She felt even more aggrieved when she took in his dirty jacket and wounded knee. "Did you have to come here dressed like that? Does it please you to see me humiliated and mocked?" She choked up toward the end, though she tried her best to hold back her tears. "Honey, Marcus wanted to explain what had happened but didn't know where to start. "Oh, forget it. Let's just get this family gathering over with," Vivian said weakly. She took a deep breath when she saw him hesitate. "Hold on right there. Who said you could just enter?" Luke stepped forward and held out an arm to block Marcus. He looked down at Marcus contemptuously. "What are you doing, Luke?" Vivian glared. "What am I doing? Your good-for-nothing husband has no right to attend this event in that shabby outfit. Can you imagine how disgraceful this would be to the Lorimer family if we were to let a food delivery driver join us in there? Are you trying to make the Lorimer family the laughingstock of Cromford City?" Luke said disdainfully. His goal was to insult Marcus as much as possible and humiliate Vivian. "Luke, whatever problem you seem to have with me can be addressed after the gathering. Now get lost and leave us alone. If you make us miss the start of the gathering, Could you bear the consequences of Grandma's wrath? Vivian felt anxious. The mocking gazes that landed on her didn't help matters either. She only wanted to get away from here. Luke snorted, refusing to back down. Grandma did say that every member of the Lorimer family has to be present. But don't you, for 1 second, forget that your useless husband's surname is Coleman. There's something important that you need to remember. He's not a Lorimer. All he is a lowly matrilocal son-in-law. He's an outsider. Then, turning to look at Marcus arrogantly, he pointed at a plaque outside the grand ballroom. Do you see that plaque? It says, "Outsiders and dogs are not allowed." Get that into your head and get the hell away from here. Luke! Vivian trembled with rage. Regardless of how worthless he was, Marcus was still her husband. He might be useless, but he'd stuck by her side for the past 3 years without a single complaint. Honey, don't get mad. Why don't you head in first? Marcus started, balling his hands into fists. Honestly, Vivian glared at him. How could he act like nothing had happened when someone had blatantly insulted him? He didn't even have the guts to say something in return. Could he be considered a man? Whatever. Disappointment washed over her as she turned and headed into the grand ballroom on her own. Luke scoffed. At least you know your worth. He patted Marcus on the face and followed Vivian into the grand ballroom after that. It was as if they were looking at a piece of trash. Soon Marcus was left alone. He stared in the direction Vivian had left. I was gonna say that I'll join you soon, he mumbled. Marcus walked over to the plaque Luke had pointed earlier and stomped on it, making it break into splinters. Everyone thinks I'm a piece of trash. None of them know that I'm the king of this world. He suddenly emanated a domineering aura as he put his hands behind his back. No trace of his earlier wimpiness left in the slightest. After calming himself down, Marcus pulled out his phone and dialed a number. It's been 3 years. The test should be over by now, am I right? He said as soon as the call connected. Yes, almighty Draken. You've passed the test. From today onward, the Pantheon's forces are under your control. The Pantheon of the Draken holds more than half of the world's power and wealth, which is now at your disposal. The voice on the other end of the line was filled with respect. Good. Marcus hung up, looking a little dazed. 5 years ago, he'd almost died in an unknown land after being banished and hunted down by his family. Fortunately, an old master had saved him and spent the next 2 years teaching him everything he now knew. Then, he'd passed the position of the Pantheon's Draken on to him, but with one condition. He had to spend 3 years as the Lorimer family's matrilocal son-in-law as a way of training his temperament. Now, the 3 years were up and it was his time to shine. How could a lousy plaque stand in the way of the Draken? A smirk crossed Marcus' face gradually. Half an hour later, in the grand ballroom, the event had started. The heavens have blessed the Lorimer family with wealth and fortune. The current head of the Lorimer family, Nora Chapman, announced with pride. Grandma, under your wise leadership, I'm sure the Lorimer family will attain greater heights. Luke stepped forward to hold her arm fawningly. The Lorimer family's full of talented youths will only grow stronger. You're right. Luke alone has managed to bring in $2 million worth of business. If everyone in his generation were to learn from him, it'd be hard for the Lorimer family not to become better. Indeed, Luke isn't the type of person you come across every day. He's the cream of the crop, even among all the youths of Cromford City. The other members of the Lorimer family took this opportunity to suck up to Luke by singing his praises. Wonderful! Nora looked at Luke with satisfaction and nodded. Then, she swept a gaze over the room and said, Of course, the Lorimer family couldn't have gotten to where it is now without the help of our friends in Cromford City. Now, let's see who our esteemed guests are. This sent a ripple of excitement through the room. Everyone knew this was the climax of the gathering. Per previous year's tradition, members of the Lorimer family had to bring esteemed guests with them to the family gathering. Whoever's guest was the most important or eminent would receive the biggest piece of the Lorimer family's pie when it came to dishing out resources. Grandma, I've invited Glory Construction Company's general manager. Grandma, I've had the honor of bringing Mr. Lawrence, the miracle doctor. My guest is Shane Bronson, the top dog of Liquor Lane." As the members of the Lorimer family fell over themselves to introduce their guests, Nora nodded in satisfaction. Finally, only two people had yet to introduce their guests. They were Luke and Vivian. "Grandma, I'm sure you'll be elated to see my friend." Luke stepped forward while shooting Vivian a haughty look. "Oh? Who is it?" Nora asked excitedly. "Verdant International's scion, Mr. Frederick Lloyd." Luke puffed out his chest proudly. As his words fell, a young man with his hair swept back stepped forward and nodded with a smile. It was Frederick. "Wonderful. Welcome, Mr. Lloyd, and thank you for gracing us with your presence." Nora sucked in a breath. This was her first time thanking a guest for joining their family gathering. After all, Verdant International was a conglomerate that had businesses in food and beverage, supermarkets, real estate, and more. Most importantly, it owned Cromford City's largest financial institution. This was a key point for the Lorimer family, as they had recently run into a major financial crisis. Luke turned to Vivian with a cold smile. "It's your turn, Vivian. You're the highlight of the show. With your looks, I'm sure you would have managed to build up something of a network." He was obviously insinuating that Vivian had used her beauty to make connections. "How dare you?" Vivian gnashed her teeth. Her face was so red it looked like she was bleeding. Nora had never cared much for her and her family. Truly, how could Vivian possibly invite anyone important when she didn't have any money or power? It was a vicious cycle that led to her only getting scraps in terms of the family's resources. "What's wrong? Don't tell me you didn't manage to invite anyone again. That doesn't make sense. Don't you have a food delivery driver as a husband? I heard he's even delivered food to someone who stays at Hingbrook Hills. Why didn't you tap into his network?" Luke did his best to humiliate Vivian. He wanted to stomp on every shred of dignity she had. He'd like to see if she still dared to fight with him in the future. Vivian lowered her head and clenched her fists tightly. Her nails almost sank into the flesh of her palm. She felt even worse when she saw Nora shake her head in disappointment. Meanwhile, the doors to the grand ballroom slowly opened to reveal two figures. One of them was Marcus, and the other was an old man with a gray beard. "Murray Fletcher from the East, here on invitation." A voice rang out clearly. Murray stood there with his hands behind his back, his voice booming. "Marcus and I are good friends, so I've brought along a diamond scepter as a gift." He presented the scepter to Nora and left without another word. Murray Fletcher. From the East? He can't be. Murray Fletcher, the head of the Fletcher family? That's the most prominent family in the East. I think it really is him. I've seen him on TV before. My God. He actually came to attend our family gathering. No other family in Cromford City has had the privilege in the past. A stunned silence descended upon the crowd, until Luke spoke up. "What? Why would someone like Murray Fletcher be good friends with a good-for-nothing like Marcus Coleman? Marcus, where did you hire some actor to pretend to be Murray Fletcher? Do you realize the Fletcher family will be out for our blood if they find out about this?" He bellowed. He refused to believe a good-for-nothing would have anything to do with the most prominent family in the East. Everyone's gazes landed on Marcus, including Vivian's. Her eyes were filled with shock, and her heart raced as she prayed Marcus hadn't pulled some sort of trick. This was the first time in 3 years that she'd had some form of hope in him. If he'd really managed to invite Murray to their family gathering and win her the biggest portion of the family's resources, she was confident she could lead her family to greater heights. "Even if I'd hired someone to pretend to be Murray Fletcher, I couldn't possibly have gotten a fake diamond scepter, right? Murray won it in an auction at Riverton last month. It's worth tens of millions of dollars, and it's the only one in the world," Marcus said calmly. As the Draken, close to half of the world's richest moguls were akin to his hired help. Murray was only one of many. In fact, he could almost be considered one of the most insignificant among the pack. Murray was Marcus' temporary link to the pantheon of the Draken while the latter was in Cromford City. "Bah! A diamond scepter, you say? Don't think I can't tell it's just made of glass." Luke darted forward to grab the scepter before smashing it on the floor. "Stop! Nora thumped her walking stick on the floor and took the diamond scepter from Luke, appraising it closely. She dealt in antiques for decades and knew much about scepters. After a long moment, she gasped. This scepter is authentic. I've also seen Mr. Fletcher at a banquet before. He's the real deal. Good job, Vivian. Nora gave her a rare smile. She didn't believe for a second that someone like Marcus would know Murray, so she figured Vivian must have somehow gotten to know him. This is impossible. Simply impossible. Luke muttered to himself, unable to believe what was happening. Grandma. Vivian was about to explain that Marcus was really the one who deserved the credit when he stopped her. There's no need to explain, he said calmly. He didn't care what people thought of him. He was only doing this to make his wife happy. Vivian looked at him, an odd expression on her face. For some reason, he seemed different today. The family gathering lasted until the evening. Soon, night befell Lorimer Manor. The family gathering was a huge success today. Luke and Vivian did especially well. However, I'm sure everyone is aware of the crisis that's currently plaguing our family. If we make it through this, there's a chance of us finally becoming part of the upper class. But if we don't, we'll be completely ruined. Nora sat at the head of the table, looking grave. The members of the Lorimer family looked gloomy. Some of them even sighed. The Lorimer Group had spent a fortune investing in a new real estate development known as Centurion Garden. The construction had been 2/3 of its way to completion when the authorities informed them that they had not met the construction safety standards required for them to proceed. After investing a total of $500 million in this project, it now seemed like all of the money was going to be lost. Considering their current predicament, the only thing that could save the Lorimer family was a massive investment to boost their cash flow. So, did anyone manage to get any investors or take out any mortgages? Nora asked while massaging her temples. Everyone silently exchanged looks upon hearing her question and shook their heads, smiling bitterly. Investors? Who would want to invest in the Lorimer Group now, when it looked like there was no way of turning a profit? As for taking out a mortgage, when had banks ever done those in need any favors? Nora couldn't help getting mad when she saw everyone fall silent. She hated how they'd given up before even going to battle. Grandma, don't be mad. Your health is more important than this. I'll think of a way to resolve this. Luke got up to pat her on the back and comfort her. He quickly swept a gaze over everyone present and finally looked at Vivian. Isn't Vivian, the almighty Ms. Lorimer, well-connected? She even knows the head of the Fletcher family. Maybe she has a way of resolving this, he taunted. He's right. Vivian knows Murray Fletcher. This is the Murray Fletcher we're talking about. Exactly. A few $1 billion probably means nothing to him. Vivian, you've enjoyed many perks as a member of the Lorimer family. Now, it's time to repay those debts. Everyone seemed to have found a way out of this when they heard Luke's words. Immediately, the pressure was on Vivian. After a moment of silence, Nora asked rather expectantly, Vivian, do you really have a way out of this situation? Don't worry. As long as you get Murray Fletcher to agree to invest in the Lorimer Group, the Lorimer family will reward you handsomely, said Nora, seemingly worried that Vivian would turn her down. Me? Vivian's face was shrouded in disbelief. They were talking about billions of dollars here. Where was she going to get that sort of money from? Besides, she didn't even know Murray Fletcher. At that thought, she couldn't help but glance at Marcus, wondering if he could do anything about this. To her dismay, he was nodding off. Bitterness overwhelmed her as she mocked herself for having had any hope in him at all. Left with no other choice, she had to come clean. Grandma, to tell you the truth, I don't know Murray Fletcher at all. Marcus was the one who brought him to the gathering, so I can't get him to invest in the Lorimer Group. Almost instantly, the smile on Nora's face disappeared. Luke let out a derisive laugh and exclaimed, I didn't expect you to be so heartless, Vivian. Are you not willing to help out your family when it's in need? Also, how much worse of a liar could you be? How can a good-for-nothing like Marcus know Murray Fletcher? In fact, why don't you say something like he's the richest man in the world and Murray his lackey? Today was the day Luke would stomp out Vivian's dignity and humiliate her, once and for all. Be honest, Vivian. Are you mad at Grandma and the Lorimer family for neglecting you over the years? Luke demanded. Is that why you're exacting your revenge now? No, that's not it. Vivian turned pale. If Luke were to successfully frame her for this and make her lose Nora's trust, she and her parents would never be able to hold their heads high after this. Grandma. Desperate times call for desperate measures. I believe that offering a reward would probably hurry things along. How about this? Whoever manages to get at least $1 billion in investments will be the next head of the Lorimer family. What do you think about that? Luke suggested. Nora took in Luke's confident expression, and then Vivian's dilemma. She already knew what she had to do. She was going to appoint Luke as the next head sooner or later. After all, he'd invited Verdant International Scion to the family gathering today. Perhaps he had even gotten Frederick to agree to invest in Lorimer Group. If that was the case, she could very well take this opportunity to finalize things. That's exactly what we'll do, she said, concluding the matter at hand. Thanks, Grandma. Luke was overjoyed. He struck while the iron was hot and said to Vivian, Do you have the guts to make a bet with me, Vivian? As long as you manage to get $50 million in investments, I'll give you the position of the next head of the family. If you can't, you and your parents will have to get the hell out of the Lorimer family. Forever. Why you? Vivian clenched her fists tightly and glared daggers at him. He was deliberately trying to drive her and her parents out of the Lorimer family. Yet what could she do about it? She was reluctant to accept the bet, but the position of the head of the family was incredibly tempting. If she could win this bet, she and her parents could finally walk around proudly. However, if she were to accept the bet and lose, she and her parents would be kicked out with nothing but the clothes on their backs. What's wrong? Don't you even have the guts to agree to such a tiny bet? Luke pressed. He wanted to take this opportunity to obliterate his biggest threat. At this moment, Marcus slowly opened his eyes. Honey, trust me on this. Agree to the bet. He couldn't care less about this race to become the next head of the Lorimer family. But if Vivian wanted it so badly, he would make sure she got it. Vivian's mind was a mess. She genuinely wanted to give the position of the next head a shot. Marcus' words only made her desire grow stronger. Perhaps it was because of what had happened earlier that day with Marcus suddenly showing up with Murray in tow. She suddenly felt like she could trust him. And so the bet was on. After making up her mind, Vivian stood up. All right then. I agree with your bet, she declared. Great. Everyone here, including Grandma, can bear witness to this. So you can't go back on your word when the time comes. Luke tried his best to suppress his excitement at the sight of Vivian taking the bait. Don't worry about that. I'm not as shameless as you. Vivian refused to back down. Since she'd decided to give this a shot, she would give it her all. Grandma, I'm not feeling too well, so I'm going to leave now, she added. With the current state of mind, Vivian knew she couldn't remain here any longer. She found an excuse to leave, and Marcus hurried after her dutifully. Luke scoffed at the sight of them leaving. A good-for-nothing and a worthless pawn. I can't wait to see them get kicked out of the Lorimer family. In the car, Vivian asked anxiously, Marcus, tell me the truth. How do you know Murray Fletcher? If Marcus and Murray were on good terms, perhaps there was some hope for them after all. Oh, he's a friend's father and I've only met him once. I happened to run into him at the entrance and asked him to accompany me to the grand ballroom. Marcus shrugged and lied through his teeth. He didn't want to reveal his true identity just yet, afraid that it would scare Vivian away. What? Vivian stared at him in disbelief, feeling dumbfounded. In that case, do you know anyone who works in a bank or owns a financial institution? She didn't want to give up just yet. Nope. Not at all, Marcus replied honestly, shaking his head. He'd only just officially become the Draken. He didn't have any connections in Cromford City. Vivian slammed on the brakes, making them screech as the car came to an abrupt stop. Why did you lead me into a trap? Then, Marcus? Where did you find the confidence to tell me to agree to the bet when you don't know anyone useful? Don't you know we'll get kicked out of the Lorimer family if we lose? You're my wife. There's no way you'd lose this bet, Marcus said matter-of-factly. God, you're hopeless. Vivian was utterly despaired. What am I gonna do now? It looks like I have no choice but to visit all the banks tomorrow and try to get as many loans as possible. There was nothing else she could do at this point. Don't be so worried, Vivian. Believe in yourself. Marcus couldn't help but feel amused at the sight of her being so anxious. How could the almighty Draken be worried about money? Vivian snorted. I must have been possessed when I chose to believe you. She glared at him. As expected, he couldn't be depended on at all. The following morning, Marcus left the house after preparing breakfast. He headed to Globestone Investments and strode into the building. Good morning. Sir, do you have an appointment? The receptionist asked politely. I'm looking for Vincent Rook. He knows about me coming here, Marcus said. Before making his way here, he'd instructed Murray to make a call to Globestone Investments but had told him to keep his true identity under wraps. Understood. Sir, please hold on for a minute. The receptionist was afraid he was an important client when she heard him refer to the company's general manager by his full name. She quickly made a call to check. After some time, Marcus sat down in Vincent's office.
I'm Vincent Rook.
Mr. Fletcher called me and told me that you needed me for something. Tell me what it is, and I'll try my best to make it happen. Oh, right. How should I address you? Vincent leaned back against the couch and crossed his arms as he appraised Marcus. What did this young man have to do with the Fletcher family? Murray hadn't made himself clear over the phone, only telling him to satisfy whatever requests Marcus was to make. Still, Vincent wasn't the type to help any Tom, Dick, and Harry he came across on the streets. He could help someone if they deserved it, of course, but if they didn't. My name's Marcus Coleman. I'm here to talk to you about investing in the Lorimer Group. Marcus got straight to the point. Marcus Coleman? The Lorimer Group. Vincent frowned. Why did Marcus' name sound so familiar? Where had he heard it from? Suddenly, realization dawned on him. He slapped his thigh and asked in disbelief, Are you the Lorimer family's matrilocal son-in-law, Marcus Coleman? The Lorimer family was a relatively well-known family in Cromford City, and Vivian was the belle of the city. The whole city had been abuzz when the news of her marrying a matrilocal husband had gotten out. Yes, we're one and the same. Marcus frowned, feeling a little displeased. It looked like Vincent wasn't the best at understanding social cues. Vincent scoffed. And here I was, wondering which hot shot I was dealing with. I've heard plenty about you. I doubt anyone in Cromford City doesn't know about you being the Lorimer family's matrilocal son-in-law. Oh, you mentioned something about wanting me to invest in the Lorimer Group, right? Sorry, but that's not happening. He'd lost interest in Marcus after finding out who he was. So much that he didn't even bother to be polite anymore. Vincent refused to believe that someone like Marcus could have anything to do with Murray Fletcher. Moreover, if the members of high society were to hear about him being afraid of a loser, he'd be the laughingstock of the city. Are you sure about that? Can I know why? Marcus' expression darkened. Since Vincent wasn't bothering with his manners, there was no need to play nice. Why? Why don't you take a look at yourself in the mirror? How dare a shameless matrilocal son-in-law like you talk to me about money? Besides, I know all about the Lorimer family's crisis. It's run out of cash and is waiting to go bankrupt. It's a bad business filled with bad people. Now get the hell out of here, Vincent said unceremoniously as he stood up and brushed some lint off his clothes. If you apologize right now and agree to invest in the Lorimer Group without any extra charges, I can pretend none of this ever happened and let you off the hook. Otherwise, you'll have to bear full responsibility for the consequences of your actions. Marcus snarled, trying to suppress his anger. Vincent burst into derisive laughter. Are you secretly a comedian or something? You want me, Vincent Rook, to apologize and agree to invest in some dumpster fire without any extra charge? How dumb can you be? And I have to bear the consequences of my actions. Huh? Oh, I'm so scared. Can you see me shaking in my boots? He looked at Marcus like the latter was a fool. Oh, don't worry. I'll make you experience true fear soon enough, Marcus sneered. He then pulled his phone out and called Murray. I'll give you 10 minutes to make Globestone Investments mine. I don't care how you do it. With that, He hung up and shut his eyes while waiting for a result. Vincent's fate was sealed from the moment he insulted Marcus anyway. Vincent practically doubled over with laughter. Acquiring Globestone Investments in 10 minutes? Do you know how much its market value is right now? $500 million. Can you even imagine that amount of money? Stop acting like a hot shot when you're nothing but a piece of trash. 10 minutes. Huh? I'll be patient and wait these 10 minutes out with you. Once the time's up, I'll have the security guards strip you naked and throw you out of here. How about that? He said menacingly. While there might be people in this world who could fork out $500 million in 10 minutes, Marcus definitely wasn't one of them. The seconds ticked by. Soon, 10 minutes were up. Hey, I'm now gonna show you what you've brought upon yourself, offending the almighty Vincent Rook. Vincent sneered. He was just about to call the security guards when his phone rang. Morning, boss. He immediately sat up straight and answered the call with a simpering smile. Soon, however, the smile disappeared from his face. What? Boss, are you joking? You sold Globestone Investments when it's making you a fortune? What? You sold it for $10 billion. Vincent's face became ashen, and his eyes were practically falling out of their sockets. Things were only made worse when he heard his boss say that Marcus, the man he just mocked for being a worthless piece of trash, was the one who'd spent the $10 billion to acquire Globestone Investments. The phone slipped out of his hand and fell to the floor with a clatter. It was then that Vincent knew he was dead meat. Sorry, but $10 billion is nothing but spare change to me, Marcus informed Vincent calmly as he got to his feet.